So good morning, everyone. My name's Natasha. I am the treasurer of the board of the EOCP. I'm pretty new to the association, so it's nice to see you guys all out here. So this is the water stream, and this morning we have Marta Green and Kevin Villac presenting on source protection planning and how it helps in a flood response. And this is a case study from the city of Merritt. Marta Green is from Associated Environmental Consultants. She is a technical specialist in hydrogeology with Associated Environmental Consultants based in Vernon, BC. Marta's expertise focuses on groundwater supply development and watershed science, including drinking water, source protection, planning, and environmental impact studies. Marta has 20 years of experience working for municipal, agricultural, industrial, and commercial clients across BC and the Yukon. Marta is the treasurer of the BC Groundwater Association, and you guys all know Kevin, so so I'll hand it off to them, and interested to hear what you guys have to tell us.
All right, thanks, Natasha, and this is my first EOCP too, but there's quite a few familiar faces from other conferences. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking about kind of continuing the theme that you guys have been hearing about the last couple hours and yesterday. But before I start, I do just want to, I'm going to be talking from a geological perspective. I'm a geologist. I work in the time frame of thousands of years, 10,000 years, 100,000 years. But I do want to acknowledge the human toll before I start. So I just have a couple quotes that I pulled off from the media during the flood. It's exhausting. I feel like I have been constantly tired, and that was 6 months later. The kids are just like, we want to go home. We miss our house. I want to run around. All right, so from this session, we will be discussing what is a source protection plan, why do we want to do it, how do we do it? We'll go quickly on how to do it. We'll give the example, and then we'll have some key takeaways from my perspective and Kevin's perspective. So on the screen, you can see on the left is a photo before I did my source protection plan before the flood, and on the right was after flood. And so I guess this is a bit of a test, is if you can figure out why this makes me really happy. All right, so what is a source protection plan? So in the end, it is a document that identifies the hazards to your source water, and then it lays out the recommendations and your priorities to make the improvements. So some people could argue it just sits on a shelf. Is it worth it? Of course, it's not until you implement the recommendations that you get the protection, but I would also argue doing the actual work, meeting, coming together, like Kalpna's talked about, doing the actual exercise, having the engineers, the operators, the planners, the GIS technicians, everyone in the same room. I personally think that the first day I'm in there with the technical advisory committee, we're already improving source protection. All right, so I think you guys probably already know why you want to do a source protection plan, as we've been talking about. We'll go through the flood, but even without the flood, there's a whole bunch of great reasons to do it. I encourage everyone to read Justice O'Connor's report on the Walkerton Inquiry. It's a bit dated now, but there's still some incredible lessons learned from that. His first recommendation is the first barrier to the contamination of drinking water involves protecting sources of drinking water. When you operate your water system, you are typically only protecting with your treatment against pathogens. There's a whole lot of other contaminants out there, that nitrates, hydrocarbons, that you would have to do a reverse osmosis treatment plant for, which very, very pricey. So we all know the multiple barrier approach. You can see it there: source water protection, water treatment, just maintaining your distribution system, doing your water quality monitoring, and emergency response planning. That is part of the multiple barrier approach. So you try to mitigate for risks that you can mitigate, but there are some risks that are out of your control. And that's why emergency response planning is part of the multiple barrier approach. In Justice O'Connor's report, typically when there is a contamination event or whatnot, it's the breakdown of multiple barriers. We can't know everything. That's why we have multiple barriers, and source water protection is one of those barriers. So I don't know why source protection planning isn't a regulation in the Drinking Water Protection Regulation, but writing an emergency response plan is the law. So I don't understand how you can write an emergency response plan if you don't know your source. And there's some other touchy-feely things that, as my career progresses, I think these also become very important. Everyone is part of protecting your water source. The hunters that are out in your watershed, keeping things clean, tidying up, making sure their boats aren't contaminating with hydrocarbons in your lake. Obviously the operators everyone thinks about. Also planners. City of Merritt is very fortunate in that their wells, they own the land their wells are on. Even though you'd think that they're in the middle of the city, you'd think that there'd be tons of hazards, I would argue they're safer than putting them away where you need to rely on a crown permit of occupation or surrounded by farmland. And that's much harder to deal with. So another reason to do it is public engagement, right? You guys want people to know about your water. So use the source protection plan as an opportunity to tell the story you want to tell. Yeah, and then this one is why we're here, right? So climate is impacting your watershed. The extreme weather events are happening upstream from you. And as we all know, towns are built on flat land, floodplains. An aquifer is a floodplain. You're gonna have your wells in flood areas. You cannot put your wells on top of a mountain, right? There's no water. So knowing your watershed will help you prepare for a changing climate. So we'll just quickly go through the steps. Has anyone done a source protection plan? Andy? Raise your hand. 1, 2, Alistair. All right, so there are a bunch of documents. I would argue there isn't the perfect one for BC. There's the comprehensive source setup, which is like 80 pages long. I use steps 1, 2, 7, 8, which is related to source and risk, that type of stuff, not your pipes. There's also the well protection toolkit, which is great. It doesn't have the risk ranking. And the one on the left is actually a pretty nice, simple guide called First Nations on Reserves Source Water Protection Plans. There's a template in the back. You could literally pull it out and just do it in 4 hours probably. And that might be like the best value for that 4 hours. So just Google those, print it out, and just start filling it out and try to pass it around. So the steps for all of those plans, they kind of follow the same steps. So first you set up your working committee, and I'll go through in my case study a little bit more. Then it's really important to understand where your water is coming from. So there's a variety of ways to delineate your assessment area or your capture zones or your intake protection zones. There's a variety of terms for that. So once you know what you're worried about, then you identify the hazards within there, and then you rank the risk. You rank each hazard according to risk. We'll go through that. And then from that, you develop some action items. All right, so we'll jump into the case study from City of Merritt. So this is all pre-flood, and then we will have a post-flood lessons learned kind of review from both of our perspectives. All right, so the first step is to establish a working committee, and this is super valuable. At the time, I think it was like 10 years now that we did it. So we only had representatives from the city, operator, public works, admin, planner. But now as I do more, I'm bringing in the communications coordinator, an elder, a youth, influencers, people on social media, farmers, Chamber of Commerce members. There's a lot, trail builders, mountain bike associations, depending on where you do it and where your hazard is and your watershed. I'm bringing in a lot of other people. I'm also bringing in people from the province. If you're on Crown land, there's some really great forest and rec sites managers that are useful to be part of there. Bring in industry. Yeah, I spend a lot more time on this because when I leave at the end of the project, these are the people that will keep it alive. Right, so this slide is for, I think this slide is for if you've got a surface water intake. So there is no one way to do your intake protection zones like there is in Ontario. It's very challenging to do a drogue study to figure out a 2-hour time of travel to your intake. So I am, as part of a different project, developing some best guidelines or, in a way you want to make this work for you. So typically it's 100 meters around your intake, and then it's really case by case. Usually if it's a lake, you kind of do it up and down the shore, and then also tributaries in the area are usually pretty important to focus on. So there isn't just one way to do this. I'm a hydrogeologist, so this is kind of more my area. There is a much better method to calculate your capture zones, and these are based on the type of contaminant of concern and how they move through groundwater. So for example, pathogens, we know they die off within 2 years, so you don't need to worry about pathogens like a landfill or septic field further away than 2 years time of travel. Chemicals, like hydrocarbons, you typically assume if they're going to be in the ground for more than 5 years, they will eventually naturally attenuate. So that's why you have the 5-year time of travel capture zone. And then only for the most persistent hazards would you worry about a 25-year, for example, nitrates. So this is a bunch of pink and some circles. So pink is, I think, the mapped aquifer for City of Merritt. Just trying to get my bearings here. So we use the circular method because it's quite flat. So I think you can see there's a series of 5 wells. You can see the 100-meter intake protection zone or wellhead protection zone nearby, and then there'll be a 200-day time of travel, and then the large one, and then a 5-year in yellow, and then the large one would be 25-year. So of course you can change this to the whole point of this is to use it. So sometimes you follow political boundaries just to make it more easy to implement. All right, so this was super useful after the flood. Just really get to know your wells. I go straight to the well logs. I print out the original 1960 well log. Those drillers back then, they took really good notes. So you can see right away the Vote Park number 2 well, screen intake is at 9.8 meters deep. That is very, very vulnerable. The other one's 20 meters. They're less vulnerable, they're deeper, right? All right, so once you've done your delineation of your aquifer protection areas or whatever you want to call them, then you identify the hazards inside that. So that's kind of like a contaminated sites investigation, typically is based on land uses. So think about forestry, think about mining, think about agriculture, then think about commercial, residential. So I'll give you some examples. So sabotage, for example, would always be a hazard. So that would be the transport mechanism there would be direct entry physically down the well itself. So that obviously would be have absolutely no opportunity for natural attenuation as it goes through the aquifer. And then sanitary sewer lines, especially the pressurized ones, right? They're going to have pathogens in the soil. Then you have a rainfall event or your snow melt. It pushes all of those pathogens into your aquifer. You turn on your pump and they come in. So once you've got your hazards all laid out, then you rank the, I think probably everyone's kind of seen this type of concept before. I really like this, but at the same time, it's super qualitative. If you end up with all very high, what's the point? You haven't ranked anything. So this is a good conversation tool, because sometimes your drinking water officer considers something higher risk than the operators, or vice versa. So this is mostly just used as a conversation tool, but the conversation can quickly get sidetracked. So I try to just quickly go through this myself. The concept is the likelihood that that contaminant will arrive at the well. So not the likelihood that there will be a flood, but the likelihood that the flood will cause a contaminant to arrive at the well. So you do need to have an understanding of not just where your hazards are, but how it's going to move through either your watershed, if it's a lake intake or surface water, or understanding the transport through ground. So you do your likelihood times the consequence, the magnitude of the consequence. So this is probably the most important aspect for you, is to understand, even if it's a low risk, if you only have one well and no treatment, that's a problem. If you have a flood and you don't know where your pathogens are anymore, or you think you might have a preferred pathway, you need a new well and a new water treatment plant. So that is a catastrophic consequence. For Merritt, we were quite fortunate, and we'll go through kind of some of the lessons learned. They had built-in redundancy. So then you rank your hazards by risks, and then for this, I had a variety of actions, and you can see a lot of the actions kind of kill multiple birds with one stone. So we had sanitary sewer lines, leaks in lead in the water supply infrastructure. I'm not sure why we had that in as source water, but it got in there. Drainage, dry wells, so storm system, roads and transportation infrastructure, obviously industry, commercial, residential properties, animals and pests. You can kind of see the ideas. So flood, fire, didn't even make it on my list in 2012. All right, so then you kind of plot your hazards. You can kind of see them with the different colors based on their ranking there. So this is a graph that I made up myself after doing quite a few of these, because everyone feels like I am just an operator. I am just an administrator. I can only do this. And that was quite frustrating, because what happens in your watershed is absolutely your business. So if the goal is to deliver safe drinking water, what does that mean? Just understanding what is in your full control, and then what tools can you use to influence others. So I know it's pretty small for you. So starting in the middle, the core is obviously the city infrastructure and your management improvements. So your water tracks, or your wireless water, your trend analysis, your sampling, your GIS systems, your infrastructure, your sanitary lines, all of that stuff you fully control. And then the next ring is engagement with other public agencies and industries. So Tolko in Merritt, meet with Tolko. They had a great group roundtable, or water roundtable. Have those meetings, talk about things, right? So next is, as I mentioned early on, everyone plays a role in source protection. So do those marketing campaigns, right? Every drop counts, all those things. So public awareness and partnerships with your community groups, Regional District Nanaimo, Okanagan Basin Water Board, there's a ton of examples. And then at the provincial level, I think there was a presentation on what the province is doing around source water now. So when they ask for advice or a response or some sort of comment, please submit. They do listen to you, and overall things are improving in BC, I think, and will continue. So that's my eccentric circle. All right, so then when I do my actions with that lens in mind. So back 10 years ago when I wrote this, they're mostly focused on what Kevin could do. So inspect the pump houses regularly from vandalism, preferred pathways, that type of stuff. Inspect your sanitary sewers and prioritize the sewers, cleaning the sewers around your wells. Do not put a washroom next to your well, please. Sample for your hydrocarbons and your comprehensive regularly. Trends in water quality are suggesting a change in your watershed. And then review your emergency response. Just a couple of those. Then there's the responsible party. This is for planning admin. So communicate to the public. This is kind of an ongoing thing. There are a lot for somebody like an organization like the City of Merritt. They have a ton of tools they can use with their bylaws because their wells are on land that they own, and they can control through bylaws what sort of land uses happen around their wells. It's much harder to do this if you have an intake and you have a Crown occupancy permit on a stream or a lake in the uplands, but there is a lot of tools we are not using at the local government, especially for groundwater systems. I'd probably say we're probably using 25% of the tools. So your planners, I would say, is probably, maybe more important than the operators. And then, of course, start sharing the plan with your first responders and trying out some actual practices. So I put a link there to the Groundwater Protection Bylaws Toolkit, a great product that the Okanagan Basin Water Board's put together. All right, so QP and operator perspective. I think we're doing really well. Yeah. All right, so just some lessons learned from me. This is great. Like, Kevin and I are still working every day. Like, we have a report due on September 30th to Ministry of Environment. Like, to hear the questions and to have this opportunity to, we are just starting to process and learn stuff. So it's been really great to hear the questions and hear everybody's others' perspectives. So I would say trust the multiple barrier approach. Yes, maintaining a good distribution system and doing your water treatment plant are 2, but there's 5, right? We cannot just rely on water treatment. We cannot just rely on distribution system maintenance. Do your water quality monitoring. Look at the results, plot them up, look for trends, emergency response, and think about your water. Continue to do the actions in your source water protection plan. Has anyone figured out why I'm happy about those photos? Andy, you got this one. So on the top left, what am I looking at? It's the top of a well, and there's a cable coming out of it. What's the problem with that? There's an opening. Yeah, like water could get in there, or a mouse. So it's not just in flood, it's if you have a mouse down your well, you're not getting it out unless you pull the whole pump out. So that might mess up your coliforms, right? So why am I so happy to see it on the right, what I see on the right? There's some silicone, right? So no water went in that well during the flood. So wells can be in floodplains. You can just let the water, Grand Forks, same thing. The water can go right by the wellhead. We might want to raise the top of the well and put the electrical panel far away and pay for a little bit more electrical cord that's watertight and put your controls away. But the well can be, and your air valve needs to be above, but wells can stay in the floodplain. You won't have access to the physical well, so the chances of your pump dying and there a flood, can't prepare for everything. Redundancy, right? We were really lucky that Merritt has 5 wells. 1 well was outside of the flood inundation zone, but it doesn't have the capacity and it has a manganese problem. We had 4 wells. Of the 4 wells within the flood zone, all 3 you could literally turn them on, except for 1 had an electrical problem. That was massive, massive. Know your sources. My job on day 6 was to tell the city if their source water was contaminated. The treatment plant only dealt with bacteria and pathogens. What about pesticides or hydrocarbons, all these things floating down the river? So I just grabbed my pen, started doing a cross-section. You can see the little scouring. People were worried about scouring. There was no change to the pathway of water moving from the creek to the river from the scouring. It wasn't deep enough. So doing the cross-section, you can kind of, I don't know if this has a pointer, but you can kind of see the scouring only went to 3 meters down, and the water level was always below that. So there is no way there could have been a preferred pathway. You're looking at Lori, standing next to the tree. She's pointing at the old berm height, and so you can see the scouring, but you can see the water level was lower than the scouring. So just putting it on paper, drawing it, this was really important. I could write an update to the source water protection plan saying there is no change in the likelihood of occurrence. Having all your documents in one spot, when I wrote the source protection plan, my appendix was huge because I was thinking, what if I need this one day? So I was able to just quickly send that to Kevin, quickly send that to everyone. We had the well logs, the cross sections, the photos. Please keep all of this stuff handy. And then the ongoing best practices, and this is the list that we'll constantly work on, and this list changes all the time. But when I'm looking for trends, you guys are the ones that will see the trends. So document changes that you're seeing. Sample for that expanded list, put it into a database, plot it up, look for changes in trends that could indicate a change in your watershed. We do want people when they're at their wells or in the watershed, if it's clean, they tend to shoot less. Like if there's no bullet holes in your watershed protection sign, that's a good sign. And just start it yourself if you don't have the support from your managers. Just start it yourself. Just start thinking and talking about it. So just a couple photos here before Kevin. So like Kevin mentioned, the flood did go right through each well, 4 of the buildings. As you can see though, the actual well head itself on all of them was above the flood, same as in Grand Forks. I think, is that an after photo on the bottom right? Yeah, so they've rebuilt, but you can see the scouring there, and that's only like 10 meters from the wellhead. And I've got the link to that First Nations on reserve source water protection plan that I like, just Google that, that's way easier, and Kevin's just got a couple slides.
All right, so from my perspective for source water protection, when the levee breaks, so that there is the pump house that went underwater, and with the breaks you can see in the lower right of that picture and the depth of the water. So for me, the big part of this, when all of this happened, because we had implemented a source water protection plan and instituted the recommendations when this happened, I trusted the plan, and I wasn't too concerned about any real major contaminants at the time. Although when this happened, we issued an immediate do not consume on all of our water, just for diligence sake, not that there was any actual contaminants. With your source water protection plan, put your recommendations into action before the emergency. So when the emergency happens, you're already set up and ready to go. And really, you've done everything you can on that side to protect your source water. knowing your system, so the way your system works, the way the water moves, the way where it comes from, your source and everything like that is a great help in the sense of an emergency. So you know where to act and what to target first and foremost to either repair yourself or get yourself back up on your feet. Knowing your water quality so that you're able to easily identify any changes throughout an event, be it a flood or a fire, looking at contaminants that way. Redundancy was a huge one for us for the flood because we had the multiple wells available to us. We were able to take four offline and run off the fifth one until we were safe and knew that we were doing good that way. And last, building relationships with their drinking water officer, that was a huge help for us. It instilled trust, the relationship that we have. They trusted us and made things a lot smoother and easier and gave us the ability to act quicker and do things faster. I think that's it. We've pretty much covered all that.
Turn this up. Okay, there you go. So now we have about 10 minutes for questions. If we have any questions in the room. Alpna, here, I'll bring you the microphone. Sorry.
This is really informative. What I find, is the microphone on? Yeah. Okay. It actually really baffles me that, you take the adage, prevention is better than cure, and yet when you look at source water protection plans, there isn't very much going on in a lot of communities. Why is that?
That's a good question. That'd be for Marta.
Oh, dear. Okay. Yeah. When the drinking water protection regulation was written after Walkerton, I think I chatted with a couple old timers, and I don't know why they didn't put it in there. In the drinking water protection regulation, it says if you are asked to do a source assessment and protection plan, then you need to do it, and this is what needs to be in it. So it's voluntary for now. Most health authorities for large systems puts it on your permit to operate. I don't know why it's not law. However, I was involved with the review of the source protection mandates and drinking water safety after the Auditor General's report on drinking water safety. And there are a lot of tools already in our regulations. It's just they're not implemented and there aren't guidelines to show you how to do it and the funding. So yeah, of course, this is my area. This is what I do. In Ontario, after Walkerton, of course, they required every single water system to either do their own or connect with their neighboring ones in their own watersheds and to do source protection plans. In the EOCP magazine, I talk about how we could do this at a regional scale. We did a pilot test, and it's very challenging. It has to come from the water system operators or the owners, the water system owners, hopefully with some carrots and sticks and some, I think most people would enjoy doing them in a workshop setting. I think that would probably be the best. You could get together and do a bunch at once. So I really hope I've passed all that feedback on to the new ministry, and Megan and Christine. There's some really great people in there now. So I am confident, Kalpna, that there'll be some movement. We just have to give them a little bit of time.
Do we have any other questions in the room here? Stephanie, anything on the line? All right.
The other thing was, it's voluntary, but the other thing is that who is actually checking on how robust these plans are when someone actually does put them in place? Because that was a concern, is with regards, you can have these plans, but the people reviewing them qualify to determine how adequate they are.
Yeah, I would flip, Kelpna, I would flip that question completely around. I don't understand how you can operate a water system without doing a source protection plan. This is your part of your risk management. I think this is like with climate change, the climate is impacting your watershed. So if you don't know your source water, I don't understand how you can make your drinking water safe. So I would flip that around. I constantly tell clients, they always want to know what's Interior Health can say. No, it's your responsibility to deliver clean drinking water. They are an oversight. You don't want them to come in. You do your job, right? You're good at your job. Do your job. You are the owner. You are responsible for delivering safe drinking water. So I flip it around, and then I flip it around, and how can the province help the drinking water systems do their job? They could do some great templates, right? But I do think it should be really individualized and try to be flexible. And it does take constant full-time equivalent kind of thing instead of capital. So that is a challenge for sure. Yeah.
Oh, we do have a question online here. Here's a question from Gord Mantell. If you were to go through another flood, what are the top 3 things you would do differently during your response?
That's a great question. Top 3 things I would do differently. I would pay more attention to what's coming at me so I could get out in front of it sooner and faster. If I had to do it again. Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough question to answer.
Maybe next year.
Yeah, hopefully not next year.
But maybe next year you'll have had time to debrief and know the answer.
Yeah. I would say another one, if I knew I had a flood coming, 100%, I would obviously mobilize, and there'd be things I'd do to protect the wastewater treatment plant. And then for the water system, I would load my reservoirs up as full as possible, get them to capacity, and then I would, in the pump houses and such within the flood zone, I would de-energize them and shut them off. So that would alleviate some stuff for us there. And for the third one, I would try to have preemptive training to staff so that they understand what's going to be important for the response while the flood is there and dealing with the water that you have.
So because I'm a resident there, you guys had different zones and you had the ability to turn off water, I'm guessing from different wells, because there's like not wells, towers, reservoirs there. Do you think that you could operate the city in zones permanently so that they weren't interconnected? So you can have the one up on the bench on its own zone. You could have the one over in Collettville on its own zone, the one up by the info center on its own zone for like different sectors of town, so that you didn't have the entire system going down versus having them kind of little quadrants.
That's a great idea, but I don't think that would be feasible to do just for the aspect of fire protection. In order for that to happen, we would have to build multiple reservoirs to each quadrant to be able to handle your peak dry weather flows of water and your fire demand if, in essence, you had a fire issue at the time. So you're better off to run this system as a whole, and then in an event like this, just isolate it and then just restart it, so to speak, within quadrants.
So I know for a fire issue, the Grandview Tower has like a flow over. So if the pressure goes below 40 psi or something, it's got the flow past to be able to feed back to the town supply. Could you not put that in place in each one of those towers so that, again, the Grandview one is on its own, it gets a substation pumped up to it, and it's kind of on its own, so you could almost like isolate it. And if there is a fire, it still flows back when the pressure drops.
Well, not necessarily for fire, that's just set up, if the main system depressurizes, that it backflows into the system. That was an engineering design on that system I wasn't involved in, but in my opinion, it was incorrect and should never have been set up that way. Because when you get into a situation we just had with a flood, as soon as your main system depressurizes and you're losing all of your water, you're pulling all of your water out of that pressure zone. So it should be set up that it is its own pressure zone and it stays its own pressure zone. So even if the main system fails, that system has its own complete system set up. And then that's what I was saying for prep for a flood, because you don't know how long you'll be down or how much water you're going to require to get yourself going again. Preemptively to fill your reservoirs full prior to the event would certainly help you out. I know kind of coming through getting one of our largest wells back online here just recently with the demand through summertime, we had changed the way we operated the water system and we ran the reservoirs to a higher level just to be able to meet water demand.
So I do have two more questions online here. One is from Bernard here. Is there a one-stop government agency that small water systems can contact for issues like logging, mining, and other resource extraction that can impact a small community water system?
Short answer, no. There's a rainbow of regulations related to source water protection, but if he emails me, I can help him. I can give him you can always call the RAP line, actually, report polluters, that kind of thing, poachers and polluters. But if he emails me, I think on the last slide, my email was there, but it's just my last name and my first initial at ae.ca, greenem@ae.ca.
All right, and one more question here from Diana. Thank you for your presentation. Source assessment and protection plan is evidently necessary for safe operation of any water system. What would you include in the source assessment and protection plan considering your experiences after the flood? And then what is your opinion on ways of connecting the source protection plan and ERCP?
Do a source protection plan. That's what you struggle with through the plan, and they are all very individual, depending on your system and your risks. Yeah.
Anything specific with the emergency of a flood or anything?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's all specific. So just that's all you do is literally I have a list. Like I've done so many of these now. I have a list, and then you just kind of visualize and you go through with your technical advisory committee, you go through literally every hazard and you think, okay, magnitude of consequence, likelihood of occurrence, you just go through it. And yeah, I mean, you're not going to be able to avoid every risk. And it's a little bit scary doing this because there's a lot of risks that come up as very high or high, but the idea is to just improve and accept where you are today and just improve it.
All right, so we're out of time, so hopefully we don't have any more questions. Thank you so much, Marta and Kevin. I also have copies of the most recent, I think it's the most recent one, the Summer Operator Digest, which has an article here about Marta and her work for the RDNO. If anyone wants a signed copy, you might be able to convince her. So, thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.